Yo, Felix, how you doing, baby? Sorry, I had the mic on mute because I didn't know when we were gonna go. Checking the mic.
Okay, he said good.
I saw that.
Oh, can you see the? Oh, you have the comments there. Okay, I'll close this then.
Yeah, and then Felix said he's gonna help monitor the comments and shit.
Cool. It very well is just gonna be us.
Nonsense.
I don't know if you heard Felix got banned from r/communism.
Being a fucking
for
revisionist.
Posting this.
Being a fucking revisionist. That's what you get for trying to promote.
I did read the rules. I read through the rules first. I know, because I thought maybe they'd have a thing about self-promotion.
Look at how quickly everyone jumps to the victim blaming.
Wow.
How it must have been your fault for getting banned.
It's a fair point. Did I read the rules? I did actually, in fact, read the rules.
No, and then I reread the rules because that was my first thought too, is maybe this dum-dum didn't read the rules. And no, there's nothing in the rules that suggests that. It's fucking rude as shit.
And I literally was like, yeah, we're just like trying to make like accessible fucking political education for people. Here's our organization. And then it just permanently banned me. So, whatever. I posted on a few subreddits. No politics on r/communism? What? Hello. Boogeyman. How you doing, nerd?
Sup, nerds? Oh, that's gotta be Joe Ra. Maybe that's Joe Ra. Howdy.
Jorah does love boogies.
Thanks, buddy.
I feel like this will be just a good little test run. Oh, I did join that Facebook group you mentioned, but I didn't get approved yet. Oh, I did get approved 40 minutes ago.
Well, there you go. It's about that time, innit?
Oh, did they ban me from it already?
Maybe.
I can't get in.
Lol.
Just start typing boogeyman into search.
Okay, so the game starts in... I can't have that there. Yeah, so the game starts in 1836, so it's like 100 years. It's 1836, so it's like 100. It's almost 200 years ago now, which is crazy. Because it only feels like it should be 150 years ago, but that's what happens when you turn 30. Is everything that seems like it should be 20 minutes ago actually happened the original Star Wars series ago. Dude, it's crazy that I was only 11 when the first, it was only 11 years between the first Star Wars movie and me being born. It was only 5 years between Return of the Jedi and me being born. Because it felt like Star Wars was over and never going to happen again. And now it's just like, that seems like such a laughable concept.
There is nothing but Star Wars.
That franchise is whatever, yeah, there is nothing with Star Wars. So yeah, it's 1836, which I believe it's like Queen Victoria, who the game's named after. She like takes power... like this month or something, or like within a couple months of the game starting, or she's only been in power for a couple months.
So that's who the Victoria is.
Yeah,
so everyone now Disney Estimates.
Stars, yeah, no shit.
All media is just turning into Star Wars over time.
It's because Star Wars is
yes, Queen.
Yes, Queen. Vic. Yes, Queen. Imperialize that Congo.
Man, she certainly loved imperialism.
Inherited the throne at 8, yeah. So she becomes queen in like 1838 and then dies in 1901. So like basically she's queen for 60 years and she's one of the longest reigning monarchs before this, the currently recently endless one just finally died.
I love living. It's gonna be a fun hour and a half, isn't it, Brian?
They were singing Lizzie's in a Box in Ireland and got a bunch of shit because of the World Cup games. All the Irish fans are singing Lizzie's in a Box. Is Queen Elizabeth's dead? Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Show Lenny. Lenny's in her litter box right now, otherwise I would. She's been crawling around on the bed. And honestly, yeah.
People demand Lenny.
The people demand Cat. Well, you have to pay the cat tax if you're on Twitch. That's what I know.
Yeah, are there any funky tokens that people can send us if they like what we're doing?
I'm minting new NFTs of communist heroes. Check out this Marx NFT. You can be the sole proprietary owner of this fucking JPEG. It says so. No, Felix, it'll say so on the blockchain. That'll make it very extremely real.
If we all believe in it, it becomes real.
You? No, I am also with Felix. Oh no, there's Jorah. So wait, who is the boogeyman?
I like to think we're all the boogeyman, personally. I know, hey kitty.
Oh no, how do I unkerfuffle this?
Oh, I have no idea. It might just be kerfuffling forever. No, you're fine. Oh, didn't you just have it?
See, why is it?
Maybe you have to make it. Oh.
Okay, stop.
Whisper.
No, I don't want to ban Felix. How do I fucking... How do I make this go away?
I feel like...
Oh god.
I feel like you have to make the thing wider. Like, make it wider, maybe?
Oh, there we go. No, I fucked up the chat window because I can't be trusted to click on things. Joe Ra, Real Monsters. Oh, that makes me so... That's the best name I've ever heard. That's legendary.
I was Boogeyman. Okay,
it's not quite. Funny. It's not quite as good as Gay the Pray Away, but that's fucking.
Thank you so
that's
much.
Pretty legend. That's pretty legend.
Me.
That's pretty legendary. Ah. Were you, Jorah? Were you old enough to see? Was that show still on when you were a kid? Because I feel like that show was on when I was like 7 or 8.
Yes, I've seen Real Monsters.
Considering your mom had you when you were 19. And you emerged fully formed like Athena from Zeus's head.
God, that's so queer.
Why not? I thought I was just smoking and playing video games. That's what you said. You tell... Since when?
Oh my god. What a quirky individual. Really?
Look, this is just...
Okay, well, you just roll slightly off screen, take a hit, I guess, and roll slightly back in screen. Yeah, there you go. That'll look really normal. And
That'll
fine.
look very normal and fine.
Yeah, here,
This'll
I
look...
wish I could just hang up a PHP shirt in front of you. Like a weed blocker.
Okay. Ambient fog. Alright.
Ambient fog.
So, when we're gonna go stay with Emma's family, and her older sister works at a weed dispensary and lives in like the downstairs apartment. Apparently what they tell the 6-year-old is, we're gonna go meditate. So I'm just gonna be like, yeah, it's fine, I'm Asian, I'm Buddhist, we meditate all the time. So I gotta go do some meditating. Do communism already. What kind of communism do you want, Felix? This isn't even supposed to start.
Clearly not the r/communism variety.
This isn't even supposed to start until 6:30. Chair. Oh, also, Emma's gonna look into maybe stealing me a Comcast, a fucking real nice Comcast computer chair, so that would be sweet. Sexy communism. Held a message for bullying. Wow. Add permit term hookers. Thanks, Felix.
Get hookers, huh? Sexy communism.
It's a very sexy communism.
I think that's been the big issue with communism, is it's not sexy enough.
I feel like our communism is pretty sexy.
Our or R?
Our.
Okay.
I know you're very bitter, honey bunny.
I'm never going to get over this, and I will not, and I shall not.
I know you're very bitter, honey bunny.
I'm just bitter naturally, so it's nice to have outlets.
I know, honey bunny. There's a sexy communism subreddit. That sounds dope. I'm sure there. Are you checking it out?
No, I'm putting this on Sniffies in case there's any thirsty gays who
Want to watch me play a fucking economy simulator?
You never know.
Comrades. See, there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. See, and this is why we had to have the mature content warning on it, so children don't come in here and hear us say things like comrades.
That's fair. That's fair. You don't get to control me, Felix.
That's cool. To our Twitch.
Well, yeah, fortune to the Twitch.
That's cool. Pretty stoked on that.
I've needed to hit him back.
That's cool. Oh, we stand for mod is God.
Hey,
no
my
God.
God.
No gods, no masters except the dialectical method. And that's what we're here to talk about. Hello, Joe Raw Real Monsters. Yo, what's up, fucking douchebags? Like and subscribe.
Alright, it's on Sniffies. You're welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Ed.
You're welcome, everybody.
No gods, no masters, only Mayor McCheese.
I'm just happy to be included.
I know you are, buddy.
Man, next time I'm just gonna put our Twitch on, like, more bathroom walls.
Hello, Den Den. So this is the country picking screen. But basically, I'm going to play as the Great Ching since we're going to talk about Mao's on Contradiction, and I thought it would be cool to, like, tie the historical country to the text. What is it? What is a communist? That's a good question.
Does that say momminist?
What is a communist? That's a good question. That does say mommusist. Thanks, Jorah. Yeah, communism. I'm gonna hope that's a serious question. So a communist is somebody who believes in fundamentally transforming the economic and political system from the one that we have now, which is basically ruled by the rich, into one that is ruled by the working classes and the people who actually produce value. You don't know me. You're welcome, Jorah. Anytime.
It was a good answer, though.
Thanks, buddy.
It was a good answer, though. Are we trying to record this? There's a start recording button.
Well, yeah, I figured I would start. Show cat. Okay. Zave, you have to show the cat.
I did show cat.
No, Zave, show cat more.
Show cat.
Show cat. Hello.
Make eye contact, Lenny. Yes.
This is my cat Lenny. She is named after both John and Vladimir. Oh, hello. Rude. Rude, Den Den.
Ha 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 ha. Ooh, spicy.
Some spicy content.
Alright. We'll have to match wit for wit. We got a lot of good content in our sleeves. I've been practicing a lot of comebacks in my free time. What else do you do in the car when you've got like 20 minutes to kill?
I don't know. Jam out to old school hyphy beats.
Yeah, while practicing your comebacks.
Dude, Emma had never heard of hyphy rap. And I just kind of thought that was like everywhere, and apparently not. Apparently maybe it did not make it out of California.
No, you're just too fresh.
Give us a comeback, Zave.
I would, but I can only give them to people of equal or greater value.
That was pretty good. You should write that one down.
If I wanted your comeback, I'd wipe it off your mom's face.
Beautiful, Jorah.
I don't know if I'm old enough to be in this chat room.
You're certainly not mature enough. But one
I'm
step at a
an
time.
Audience. Whether I'm a mature audience is a very different conversation.
Well, we clicked that this was only for mature audiences.
Fuck. Yeah, this is all the real shit.
Yeah, well, Jorah went to theater school, so Jorah can also sing all of these words, all of this way of speaking too. It's very impressive.
Do a Shakespearean sonnet. And for $30, don't do one.
There once was a man from Nantucket.
That's not a sheet. That's one. Close.
In chat, yes, in chat. Let's see. Honestly, yeah, you should chat out a whole Shakespearean sonnet. That's a limerick.
Ooh, okay. Are we gonna get sonetized? Ooh. Though I know she lies. I know this one. So she does Shakespeare.
Look, it's well known that Shakespeare is incredibly hot. Like, anyone who can do it well, it's pretty sexy.
I love all the conspiracies about him. Like, oh, he was gay. No, he was bi. No, he was 15 different bisexuals.
He's 15 different, and a beetle.
Didn't he marry Anne Hathaway?
No, he did not marry Anne Hathaway. He was a bisexual beetle. I think I'm gonna go with that, and I honestly think that he wrote most of the Beatles songs, and that's part of why they blew up. Because they're both from Britain, and that's all one thing, right?
I personally think that he was a handful of bisexual Beatles. If we're gonna be honest here about the reality of Shakespeare.
What do you call a group of Beatles?
A bisexual of Beatles.
Thanks, buddy. Beatles manager was gay. Really?
A barge of Beatles?
It honestly would not surprise me. That's fascinating. I've never heard that before, Felix. That sounds fascinating, though.
That he was bisexual Beatles?
No, that the idea that the Beatles manager was fucking John Lennon? I've never heard that before.
Who was it?
Of course, who wasn't fucking John Lennon
in that
the
era?
60s? That's very true.
I feel like I still am retroactively.
Retroactively fucking John Lennon. The Zay Forster story.
Well, we're already off to a great start. I believe you did not record any of this.
No, this Twitch is no. Jorah already told us that Twitch is recording all of this. So good job.
Good.
This is your fault. This is your fault. Swarm of Beetles. Okay.
I like Barge of Beetles.
Yes, Brian Epstein. Yeah, the guy. Oh, yeah, and he was like the big dude. Yeah, he managed their whole career. Okay, I will look into that, Felix. That sounds fascinating. Alright, I think it's close enough to 6:30 and I'm getting bored, so I think it might be time to just kind of start the game. Swarm of Beetles, no relation to the other dude, right? Yay, play the game. You do a communism. Okay, so that's like... So that is one of the hard parts about playing China, and it's like, especially in this era, is it's like, it seems very unlikely that China will end up as a communist country if you just kind of like look at it objectively from where it's at in 1836, and it really does kind of speak to a like the weird trajectories of history that it ends up there, because it is not one of the it doesn't appear to be one of the most likely candidates in 1836.
Are you gonna record?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. They said it was recording on Twitch, but I guess we'll click that recording button too here on the OBS thing and see if it works. We'll see how that goes. So, yeah, so China at this point is an absolute monarchy. They've been run by the Qing dynasty for almost 200 years. Don't click the OBS recorder. See? Stop recording. It's fine. Okay. On Felix's life. And we're going to trust Felix because Felix has done this a billion times. So, yeah, China's at this point where it is an absolute monarchy. It has ruled through all of feudal and medieval Asia with basically an iron hand throughout the islands. And at this point, it is like just now being pressured by European colonial powers. Opium gets introduced into China in like the late 1700s, and by this point, lots of people are addicted to it. China's a very like rural and feudal country, and a lot of making this 100 years come together is figuring out both like how to industrialize China enough that it can defend itself from being pried apart by the Western powers, because this is the era in which that happened. And a lot of it is also about like how to modernize your political and economic reality beyond where you're at. So part of the reason why I picked Victoria 3 to do this and to talk about on Contradiction is because it's like a historical simulator where you manage a country and all of its like politics and economy, and you really kind of get to see how a country is animated by like its internal contradictions between like how developed it is as a society, like what does it produce, how does it produce stuff. So when you're looking at a country like China, like you can kind of just go look at its population, where it's like there are 365 million people in China, so we are the biggest like the most populous country in the world, but the vast majority of people, like 325 million of them, are peasants who work on subsistence farming, and at this time, like legally, they're serfs. So they're like tied to the land, they're not allowed to move without their master's permission, and there is no like, they can't just like dip and go move to the city. Like there are all kinds of rules about what they can and can't do. There is no voting anywhere in China. You guys can kind of see the screen. So like this is like a little spreadsheet of the politics of the country that kind of governs how it all runs. And yeah, China is like an autocratic monarchy where there's no voting because the head of state's power is absolute and they are held accountable to no earthly power. So like China's still in the age of like the God Emperor, where the official kind of state religion is that the church is an official organization of the state, all the minority religions are discriminated against, and everybody from the emperor on down goes around telling everybody that the emperor is a god. So this is where we're at historically in the world as we're trying to figure out where to take this country. On Contradiction, so Mao is Chinese and he draws a lot from Chinese philosophy to like write this book. Would I say that this is accurate to the historical beliefs of the time, or is that just one of the presets? So yeah, basically every country starts with like different laws and kind of different, so like, oh, you kind of can't see it. Let me move my face a little bit. So every country starts with like different laws and different politics, and they're like as closely based on the country at the time as possible. And a lot of like the point of the game is to develop like the means of production from like largely subsistence farming into like big industry, and also kind of like to develop your, as those things happen, they change and develop like the internal politics and contradictions of your country. So you can kind of see, you can see here like on this screen, actually let me make my fucking face, let me make just like a little bit smaller so you can see more of the screen. So you can see like who our emperor is, who the different power groups are. So these guys are the landowners in China. They're basically like the official professional bureaucrats underneath the emperor. And right now they're stoked and they have a lot of power from their money because we live in an autocratic society where might makes right and nobody has any like basic rights. And over time, as you build up industries and invest in buildings and shit, different pops, like people within your country, get different levels of political power, and it kind of represents the growth of like the capitalists and the trade unions, and all of these guys represent different laws and shit that they want passed. So one of the things that Mao says in On Contradiction is that like everything moves according to its internal contradictions, And what this is supposed to represent is like the internal political contradictions within the country between the like different interest groups, how happy they are. If they like you more, they'll give you like little bonuses and shit to your diplomatic influence, or they'll give you like penalties to your technology spread because the rural folk are pissed off. How many hours do I have in Victoria 3? Like, so it came out probably like a month and a half ago, and I've got like 60-ish hours into it at this point, which feels like a lot. But yeah, I've also, if I'm being honest, I've also watched a lot of fucking YouTube videos about it, so it's probably the actual amount of obnoxious time I've spent thinking about it is more than that. You gotta please the rural folk. Sometimes, and they can be really useful and valuable in, can you eat the Pope in this one? Unfortunately not. This game is not as cool as Crusader Kings 3. You cannot eat the Pope. It is much more like a population and economy simulator than it is like a fucking fun role-playing game. It is very sad and quite pathetic. And honestly, I feel like if we were to go conquer the Papal States, because like, at this point in history, like, Italy's not one country, and at one point the Pope owned more land than just fucking Vatican City, and there were serious arguments within the papacy about whether or not they should try to fucking conquer the whole world. Thank you for that octopus, Chora.
So part of what you're trying to ameliorate or navigate is like the different class interests.
Right.
And as you continue to develop and like you're trying to transform over workers' rights, like you've got all the different groups representing different interests, different classes, different parts of the bourgeois, petty bourgeois, and proletariat.
Right.
And that shapes the stability of the overall country. Right.
Because like right now our government is considered very legitimate, so we have all these like bonuses to passing laws and shit. If you want to pass other laws, you have to get other groups into your government, and that kind of starts to destabilize your country. But if you don't want to be a traditionalist economic system with crappy taxation capacity and then be over here dealing with all these notifications about how you don't have enough tax capacity for all of your crap, you kind of have to like advance your laws. Karl Marx called like the laws and like the social relationships, he called them the relations of production, and he said that they stood in contrast to like the means of production, which is like basically like the actual physical stuff that makes everything in the world. So you can actually see literally all of the buildings in your whole country. You can see like what production methods they use. You can see like what they focus on, whether it's like luxury or non-luxury furniture. So you have an incredible like level of control over the whole economy, and it's thousands of little, it's fascinating because it's fucking thousands of little micro tweaks that really change the whole setup. So one of the contradictions that we have going right now is that like we have $14 million in the bank that our country is not spending on stuff. And like when you're running a giant economy and you're not built, like you need to be building stuff. You don't want to just have money accumulating, because another way to look at that $14 million is that's $14 million that we haven't transformed into buildings or production capacity. So we should really, I think it's more like 15. So we should really figure out how to do that. So some of the things we're going to do are start building more construction centers, because that'll allow us to build more shit at a time. So we're literally developing the means of producing construction, because that's kind of what our country needs right now, given that the vast majority of people are peasants who work for feudal landlords and kind of don't have any freedom. Yes, build roads. It's like proto trains. Is that like a tent? Oh yeah. What is that? I see emojis. See a winged frog. When frogs fly, is that when I'm gonna unpause the game maybe? And then I see a tent. Oh yeah, thank you for coming to this live stream for the People's Housing Project. In addition to talking too much about how the economy works, we try to exploit the contradiction in the housing crisis between the idea that housing is a human right and capitalism treats it like it's a fucking commodity by building emergency shelters for homeless folks on the ground. We're also working to challenge the government's control over land, because if land is really public, then people who have nowhere private to live should be able to live on public land. And there is this contradiction between what people need and what they're fucking given in this awful, god-awful capitalist society. So let's unpause the game and we'll kind of turn it on slow.
I'd say one more thing about PHP, that's something that we're doing within our internal contradictions as well, is we function as a workers' democracy. So we're sharing, in the organization, like we're sharing all the decision-making and responsibilities, which is a challenge to how we know conventional labor goes, an internal contradiction. Oh, okay. Thank you. Where in traditional labor, it's like the internal contradictions are you have the boss who has bosses and managers like all the way down, and then all the workers at the bottom with no actual power in their workplace. So it's important to us to both like challenge the contradictions of relation in our community of like, nope, like we're not going to let private land sit there unused. And it's equally important that as we're doing this work, like we are changing the internal contradictions of labor from like a top-down hierarchy into a horizontal like workers' democracy.
Correct. Yeah, because one of the things that Lenin talked about is like how important it is to abolish the distinction between management and labor, and the idea that like given that the workers run the whole factory, that there's no reason that they need bosses, or like once the factory's going, like the capitalists who are like necessary to the founding of the thing dialectically transform into their opposite of unfucking necessary to its continued running. And there comes a point where if you're a communist, you believe that like the private ownership of the means of production becomes in the way of the growth of the means of production themselves, and we could actually provide more material wealth and power if things were not privately owned.
Yeah, like we could be making more vaccines and getting them out quicker and producing them better, but we're held down because of the private means of production. It actually is in the way of scientific progression.
Correct. Okay, so we have our first, like, big thing. So this is the opium crisis, and this is basically, like, one of the first historical events that happened to China, and basically it is representative of, drugs, woo. Yeah, so in the 1790s, Great Britain was importing so much tea through India, from China through India, that the average British person spent 1/6 of their income on tea. So Britain was running this massive trade deficit with China. They were trying to figure out how to make up for it, and they started pushing opium into the country because, like, their colony, the British East India Company, tried to grow a bunch of cotton, but because Egypt was also growing a bunch of cotton, yeah, limeys do love that leaf water, and they did fucking need that tea. And to be honest, like, you know, caffeine is close enough. I knew what you meant, Jorah. Is that a slur? I don't know. I think only if you're, like, English British, because I'm pretty sure the Scots and the Irish don't fucking like the English, and they're trying pretty hard not to be British, so that's pretty cool. So they pushed a bunch of drugs into China, like, and the Chinese historically tried to crack down on it. Twisted X. Nice to hello. It does seem like not the best thing to say, so because we don't want to piss off any of those Euros, because they're nice people, most of them, for all of this colonizing they're doing here. Cause of scurvy and what all. So historically, what happened in Great Britain is the Chinese like really cracked down on it and kind of lost a big war to Britain. And realistically, like, you're gonna have to deal with the addiction, like, with the hindsight of history. Oh yeah, no, pushing drugs historically, yeah, 100%.
That's kind of what I thought. they meant more than using the word limey.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dave. Yeah, no, 100%. So yeah, that's how. So China got to the point where they cracked down and banned all foreign trade except through like one port, and the British were basically like, "Fuck you, you can't do that," and launched this. This is where the term gunboat diplomacy comes from, because at one point the British Empire was so much more technologically advanced than most of the rest of the world that they could just kind of sail a couple gunboats up the river, bomb your capital city, and you'd have to do whatever they wanted. So historically, what happened to China was they fought real hard by trying to crack down because they dramatically underestimated the ability of what the emperor literally referred to as a tiny island of barbarians to fuck with the heavenly kingdom. So given in the game that you end up having to deal with the opium addiction anyway, in my opinion, it's better to bide your time and really fuck with the colonizers later once you have enough guns too, given that they're already pushing the opium and your people are already addicted. So the idea here is to play the long game and not start a bunch of shit with the British when you don't have to. So colonialism sucks. It would be really nice if we could just all run our own borders forever, but alas, history and power, like, that's why Marx says it's like, you know, people make the world, but they don't make it of their own choosing. They make it out of the world they're given. And if you really had all this power over China, you kind of just have to make do with the world that you're given.
So now you'd also say the internal contradictions of China have changed with the introduction. Now there's a new factor.
Right, yeah. So it's like, exactly. And it's like, why the same reasons that drug addiction spread through China are the same reasons that drug addiction spread through America. There are lack of investment in alternatives, and there is a dramatic amount of poverty and fucking need. So people are like, that's why it's so widespread among these feudal peasants, because there's nobody, it's not like you can just go out and vote. Like, there's no one to vote for. The emperor is the god. God picked the emperor to be the emperor, and he will be until you die, and then his son will be emperor. And that's just kind of where China's at. So a lot of people are just kind of trying to numb themselves. And it reminds me a lot of, like, how many people don't fucking vote. Like, if didn't vote, yeah. Real monarchy. Thank you, Jorah. So it really kind of speaks to, I lost my train of thought. Now I'm stuck on real monarchy.
Well,
voting, yeah. So it goes back to, like, half the people didn't vote. Like, if didn't vote was a candidate, it would have won 47 of the states in the Hillary-Trump election. So, like, more people don't vote than do. And it's like, people who are checked out of our political system and economically oppressed and don't have any health care and are trying to fucking figure it out. It's like, no wonder addiction is, like, up in America. It's like we are dealing, and then you have fucking Pfizer doing the same thing where they're just like pushing it on everybody through all of their, like, it's sus as fuck. What do you call it? Infomercial diplomacy? Take this fucking Prozac. Yeah, the proletariat are the new peasants, Felix.
The peasants.
We're the oppressed of this time, and it's a step up from peasantry, but it's not that much of a step up in the long run, apparently.
Should we kind of get into some defining of Mao's contradiction? Talk a little bit more what those terms mean.
Talk a little bit. I mean, we can do whatever you want, Zave. Is that what you think is good?
Well, I feel like you've set a good stage for where we are right now with, like, China.
Mm-hmm.
It could be good to now start setting a little bit of what are we talking about with contradiction?
Getting into Mao.
Yeah.
Okay, that actually sounds really good. Ooh, gold discovered in outer Manchuria, so that's cool. So now there's just a bunch of free gold coming in here. So we're gonna keep tanking up our construction centers, so that way we can build more stuff, because even though we built like 3 or 4, we still are making a shitload of money. Is capitalism good for cell phones, Jorah, or is labor good for cell phones, and then somehow capitalism makes the money? Who designed the iPhone? Steve Jobs or a team of engineers? Defining terms. What was your question? Who is Mao?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, I feel like we've set the stage for where we are right in Victoria III, kind of how it works. We've set the stage a little bit for, like, where we are right now in Chinese history. I feel like could be good to set the stage then for Mao and on Contradiction, as then you continue to like play the game.
Right. Okay. So Mao is the greater. Yeah. Oh God. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. No, I missed Twisted's comment about having a cell phone now. Hey, we have cell phones. We're winning. It reminds me of that meme that goes, it's like, have you ever, because it's like, yeah, right? Well, it's like, yeah, your healthcare sucks, but have you ever considered the fact that in a single nacho cheese Dorito, you get more extreme nacho flavor than a medieval king got in his whole life?
Yeah.
The Starbucks mermaid, but honestly, yeah, the Starbucks mermaid seems like she makes the coffee.
To Twisted's point, part of what we're trying to set is like showing the, like, putting capitalism, taking it, like, kind of, I don't know, putting it in context of, like, economic development. Where, like, to be fucking real, like, compared to serfdom, capitalism is fucking better. Like, you get to move where you want, you get to leave, you're not tied to the fucking area.
You get to vote.
You get to vote. So, like, absolutely, like, capitalism compared to serfdom is better. The problem that we reach now is assuming that capitalism is the best and the final economic system, and that is where it is kind of a farce.
Right. And it's like, so yeah, where it's like, this is the end of history and as good as things can get. So one of the things that Mao talks about in this essay is how, and he says that the essence of dialectics is basically like how one thing transforms into another. For those who don't know, Mao was the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. He went on to become the first premier of China and run China as a socialist society. But when he wrote On Contradiction, he was just like a scrappy guerrilla general hanging out in Jiangxi, like up here, like somewhere in like somewhere in northern rural China. That is hilarious. Yeah, somewhere in rural China, and he was basically writing this from the guerrilla war that he was fighting against the nationalist Chinese, the Kuomintang, who wanted China to be a capitalist republic, and the Japanese Empire, who at this time, who by 1936 has teched up dramatically and is empiring the whole rest of the world. Okay, if he reflects on the Chinese Revolution. So he's reflecting on parts of the Chinese Revolution like it's in the past. So he's talking... So, like, in 1913, there's a revolution in China that overthrows this Qing Empire that we're playing as right now. Historically, it gets overthrown in 1913 by, like, an alliance of the literati and, like, kind of the industrialists and a little bit the trade unions and the communists, right? And then there's this guy, Sun Yat-sen, who's kind of like their unification candidate. And then he dies, and there's a shit fight between the Chinese who want to go past capitalism and democracy into communism and workers' democracy, and the Chinese who want it to stay like a capitalist country. And so they have a whole big civil war that Mao describes a little bit in the book, and then he talks about how, like, the contradiction between the two of them becomes the less important one when Japan invades, because then the contradiction between China and Japan becomes bigger than the contradiction between the Kuomintang and the communists. And he talks about how, like, that's how, like, when we're talking about, like, the unity of opposites or the identity of opposites within a thing, like, what we're really talking about is how one thing transforms into another, right? How the emperor transforms from the ruler into not the ruler. How, yeah, right? How, like, the bourgeoisie transform in this time from, like, a marginalized group that's only 0.7% of the political power to, like, the big guys who end up leading the revolution in 1913. How the peasants transform from serfs into their opposite, free, right? How women transform from legal property of their men to free and independent humans. One of the things I think the Chinese Communist Revolution does not get enough credit for is the end of foot binding in China. And, like, women were still, like, in many parts of rural China, like, having their feet fucking bound as part of this, like, old Chinese beauty standard about how women were supposed to look. And you know, maybe it makes me a cultural imperialist, but I don't think you should give women permanent disabilities just because you think it looks nice.
Hot take.
Hot take. I feel like if women want to bind their feet, they should make that choice for themselves. Hot take. So, you know, China, like, it wasn't until 1949 when the communists won the Civil War that they made that practice illegal, and I think that that matters. So, like, this is from Mao. Lenin said that dialectics is the teaching which shows how opposites can be and how they happen to become identical, under what conditions they transform themselves into one another, and why a human mind should take these opposites not as dead or rigid, but as living, conditional, mobile, and transforming themselves one into the other. So contradictory aspects cannot exist in isolation. Without its opposite aspect, each loses the conditions for its existence. Without life, there would be no death. Without above, there would be no below. Without good fortune, there would be no misfortune. Without landlords, there would be no peasants. Without peasants, no landlords. Without capitalists, no workers. And then he goes on to say, without the imperialist oppression of nations, there would be no colonies. Without colonies, there would be no imperialist oppression of nations. So it is with all opposites. They are opposed to each other, and then on the other hand, they are interconnected and interpenetrating. So they're both interdependent, like one cannot exist without the other. And then under certain conditions, it's how do they become one another, right? So like without war, there's no peace. How does war become peace? Why does peaceful time become war? And that is what dialectics is the study of. So it's like, how do all of these peasants become free? How do these like industrialists who are weak and few become powerful and many? How do the trade unions and the worker, like the working class, which kind of really isn't. Okay. Counterpoint, Felix. Frederick, reflecting on opposites, Felix says, I honestly think they are an entirely human creation. The natural world does not exist in a binary. I keep being torn on whether I want this chat on the screen or not, because on one hand I don't want to cover shit up, and then on the other hand I want people to be able to see what the chat says.
I think they can just on their screen.
Just on their thing? Okay, cool. Well, that shows you how much I fucking know about Twitch. Okay. So I think they are an entirely human condition. The world doesn't exist in a binary. So what's really interesting is that, like, Frederick Engels and Lenin both think that it does. Engels writes this book called The Dialectics of Nature, where he's studying... Cool, thank you, Twisted. Thank you, Felix. Where he's studying, like... where he looks at the natural world and talks about how it evolves dialectically, right? Because, like, without predators, there are no prey. And there are, like, constant contradictions between every living thing and everything around it as they compete to reproduce and they fight over existence, right? Like a tree is a tree's desire to grow, like a tree's growing upward towards the sun is in contradiction with gravity itself. But yeah, there's there's like homeostasis is a really good way to think of it, like from an ecological standpoint, because it's like, you know, they're interdependent, and like, yeah, at certain times, like during a drought, like the lack of water becomes the primary like the need of living things for water and the lack of water becomes the primary contradiction. And then like during a flood, it's like now there's not a lack of water. If anything, an animal's need to not drown becomes the primary contradiction. And it's how, like, under certain conditions, one thing transforms into another, right? And it's like the tree is like this little sapling, and like if it does its thing right, its bark's hard enough, eventually it grows up into this big tree. And it's constantly being pulled on by gravity, and then at some point it dies, and, you know, gravity pulls it down, and a thing that was standing becomes not anymore. Yeah. Hegel, like, this all goes back to, like, all of these dudes getting really high and reading Hegel, because Hegel talks about, like, fundamentally every, like, being itself. Aw, I love that. Being itself is a contradiction, because everything that is always being and becoming. Like, the thing is a lot, like, we're all alive, and we're also, like, very slowly becoming dead. Like, We are currently our age, and we are also actively becoming older. You know what I mean? Right, isn't that inspiring to know, Jorah, that you're slowly becoming dead? Yeah, so everything is always becoming. Like, an infant is always becoming a toddler is always becoming a child, like, things live and die, and change, and fundamentally transform into one another.
Which is a little bit to, like, Felix's point. It's like, to say that, yeah, things aren't just in this, locked in just, like, a binary thing, they kind of sit there in stasis, like... It is the contradiction of things together that creates synthesis, that creates change, and creates motion.
Yeah, motion itself is a contradiction between, like, inertia and momentum. Everything is always everything all at once. Correct. That is exactly right. One of the greatest Buddhist thinkers of all time was Miyamoto Musashi, and the koan that he wrote in his book is, if anything is anything, then everything is everything. Yeah, and God put wisdom all over the world, Jorah, including in yellow Buddhists, so what it do?
You typed that before you said your thing?
No, that was me responding to her. We still have too much money.
So what are the contradictions that you're focusing on right now
so
the game?
So right now we're focusing on the contradiction between our population and our lack of means of production, because we are trying to build up our construction center so we can build more stuff at once. Basically, construction center is represented by, like, these little construction points, and the more that you have, the more stuff you can build. So right now we're building construction centers, which is basically... Oh, and then we can go into our buildings, and we can change how we produce things. So even though we're low on tools and iron, we should just lean into using tools and iron to build stuff, because it'll start using a lot more money, and then we can start building more iron, because it takes iron and tools. It takes iron and tools to run construction, and so now we need iron. So we're going to handle that contradiction between our needs, our inputs, and our... So here's an excellent contradiction in the game. Inputs and outputs. So every building, almost every building needs inputs in order to create some kind of output, whether it's iron or whatever. So, like, for example, the iron mine needs tools, and it needs tools and workers, and it puts out iron. So it needs tools and workers, and it puts out iron. And then the tool workshop needs wood and iron, and then it puts out tools. So it's like a lot of the early industrializing game is this revolving door of, like, wood, iron, and tools, because you need tools to get more wood and iron, and you need iron to build more. You need iron and wood to build the tools you need to get most of them. Because everybody was doing shit, a lot of people were doing shit by hand, or with handmade iron tools rather than industrialized iron tools. So that's the dream, Felix, is that eventually labor itself will be automated, humans won't have to do anything. Marx talks about, like, how technology reduces the value of human labor, because, like, where it used to take, like, all these fucking thousands of peasants to farm all this fucking grain, now, like, 50 dudes, a couple tractors, and a bunch of industrial technology can produce, like, the same amount of grain in as many hours as, like, millions of people used to. So it creates, like, a real problem where it's like food is not worth very much, but everyone still needs it. So what do you do when a commodity's not worth very much, but it also, like, an ear of corn still feeds as many people as it did. If anything, a ear of corn feeds more people than it did 100 years ago. But now an ear of corn is like pennies. What if we just steal all the See, Felix, now we're talking about seizing the means of production. And communism basically amounts to an organized robbery of all of these buildings from... See, because right now it employs... Oh, that's furniture. Where's one of the ones that employs capitalists? There we go. So right now, for example, this tool factory employs 16,000 laborers, 2,000 machinists, and 400 capitalists. And communism as an ideology is basically like, hey, what if those 18,000 people took control of this workshop and just didn't give any money to the capitalists anymore? And that's what a worker cooperative mode of production is. And it would increase the profitability of this factory by almost $11,000 because we wouldn't be giving any money to the useless capitalists. And they would be out of a job, but also fuck them.
So how come you don't just click that button right now?
Because we don't have the laws and the technology to do that. So, because it takes, you have to like redistribute power and have a council. So basically you have to have a workers' republic government, and no one supports that. The trade unions support it and everyone else is against it. Yeah, so like, especially because we haven't moved through, like we're not at a parliamentary, yeah. Where's the line between the capitalist and the laborer though? So the capitalist is the person who owns the means of production and gets to decide what happens to it, and the laborer is a person who is paid their wage for doing labor in someone else's factory. So, does that answer your question? Because right now the capitalists do all the function of management and production decisions, and the workers just have to obey them. And under a workers' cooperative, the workers make the decision about what gets produced, how, under what conditions, and what they get paid, and they elect management. So this is cool. So there is a political movement to abolish serfdom, which will piss off the landowners, but it will also help with money. And because everyone else has banded together, it's like, fuck the landlords. Because part of the problem is that serfdom also gives the landlords more political power, and we don't want that. So we want to get rid of serfdom so we can get rid of traditionalism, because we want a better taxation system. And you can't do good tax. Can you just turn off landlords? Yeah, so yes, you can cheat and hack the game and just kind of change the laws, however, but like, much like real life, if you're not using cheat codes to break the physics of the game, like unfortunately, Felix, there is no console command that will just delete Jeff Bezos. We're gonna have to do this the old-fashioned way.
I feel like here is a good time to do a little quick talk on transitional plans.
Transition. Yes, what about them?
Well, I feel like that's kind of what this game has taught me. So like,
okay.
Big ideological thing.
I'm gonna turn on the smoke machine to talk about ideology.
Okay. So I feel like a thing that I've seen, especially when it's in like leftist discourse, it'll take on arms. Correct, Twisted, 100%. So I kind of seen a lot of like leftist discourse. It's like, cool, there's, the idea that we should like transition from where we are to where we need to go. And then there's another idea that I've seen populated that's like, we just need to overthrow everything all at once and switch everything and like go from where we are to where we need to be. And I feel like what Victoria 3 is really good at showing is like...
can't you just delete the landlords?
Or also known as, can't you just delete the landlords? And it's like, cool, as correct as that is, like, we kind of have the world as it is right now. And there isn't really an option to just turn off the landlords. Like, you have to build a movement, you have to, like, build enough political power, your movement has to have enough economic power to be able to keep it self-sustaining. And that's what's cool about this game is like, in order to get from where you've started with the beginning of the game to where you want to get with those workers' councils, like, you have to work with capitalists, you have to work with these systems, you have to like,
you have to deal with
the push and transition.
You have to deal with the historical reality you're given rather than the one you want.
Yeah, and that's kind of like where we're at right now is like, okay, as much as I would love to just turn off the landlords tomorrow, like, we all know that's just not really how it's gonna work. Like, that doesn't mean we don't try for that and push for that and say it. It's also like, okay, well, so realistically right now, like, probably the best use if we're gonna transition is to like focus our energy on like the monopoly landlords, like, more than trying to get every single mom and pop. Like, who are the companies that now own thousands of properties, and how can we start like targeting our efforts around like uniting people around a movement to focus on the abolition of like monopoly landlords and continue to push for the abolition of all landlords.
Correct. And it's kind of just like, yeah, because like the world, unfortunately, the world does not just change overnight. Like, that's one of the things I appreciate about, because there are video games that are power fantasies where you can just kind of like run around and murder whoever you want. You're basically an unkillable god. And then there's other games where you have to deal with the reality that you're given. And one of the things I appreciate about like Paradox, like this studio's games versus like the Total War guys, is that like you are much more trapped in the history and in the world as it was then than you are in the Total War games. And you are much more stuck with like reality itself, so it imposes fundamental challenges to like think like the people who were alive at the time did. And it's like, okay, so with 100 years of knowledge and like all the armchair quarterbacking I could fucking do in the world, like, how can I do it better? How can I do it better? How does it go better? You know what I mean? I hope all of that makes sense. What about to go back to Felix, to your other question, what about middle management and lead production workers, right? So like, that's part of why in America they do that thing with the National Labor Relations Board, where as soon as you have higher firepower, you can't join a union anymore. And it's a way to divide people. They've separated income from power, right? So it's like, even though the manager of the Fred Meyer makes like an extra dollar, yes, that's a new tech that is mandatory service. So it's basically like, so you can basically like conscript more people, which is like a draft to order them to fight. But we don't even have line, so like it's 1837 and China does not have line infantry at this point. So like we're not even where the European powers were 80 years ago. So we're gonna go do that. So it's like, yeah, we can conscript all these guys, but they're basically body, like, for as courageous as they are irregular infantry, so they are basically just kind of bodies holding guns that are drafted to help. And we have like 1.1 million soldiers, but like 700,000 of them are fucking conscripts. So it's like we can draft a bunch of guys, but like drafted soldiers are not nearly as good. They're very expensive because you have to call them up, whereas you're like always paying for this professional army. So the real goal is to get parity, like equivalent fucking firepower or tech to the European powers, so you can at least hold them off with your artillery. So like right now we don't even have any arms factories, so like if we want cannons we have to import them from Europe. Like we're still using cavalry because we don't have cars. Like the Europeans don't have cars yet either. But yeah, our military, so like, yeah, we can conscript more guys, but it's not great. Really what we need is iron and tools. So anyway, so it's like, to go back to what we were saying, it's like they separate the middle managers by paying them $1 an hour more, but by giving them higher firepower. So even though from an income bracket and like economic power standpoint, they're like just as oppressed as the fucking workers making $1 less than them, because they have higher firepower, they have this like power management political interest where it's like, if you want to make the real money, you got to be a good store manager. So in order to move up the economic ladder, you have to play the store's internal political game. And like rat out workers who don't do their jobs and enforce production quotas and crack down on homeless shoplifters and whatever, right? So like, this is why Marx called the first volume of Capital like the critique of the political economy, because he was trying to remind everybody there's no such thing as like pure economics. Everything, the economy itself is in contradiction, because like what's good for the proletariat is not good for the capitalists, and what's good for the capitalists is a lot of times not what's good for the workers. Or at this point in history, like what's good for the capitalists is not really good for the emperor. Like what's good for the intellectuals is not really good, because the intellectuals want like multiculturalism, and the petty bourgeois want like a national supremacy. So like these two groups are in contradiction over who should have fucking rights as citizens in this country, right? So China has foreign cultures are discriminated against. Not multiculturalism, I know, right? Next thing you know, the Asians and the Jews and the queers will be running everything.
Oh God.
It's funny. It's
utopia.
It's funny because we're all straight and cis.
Since we've got about 10 people, looks like, do you want to just give like
a
that's
cool
log of PHP?
Oh yeah,
and a like, subscribe, the classic.
Yeah, so this is brought to you by the People's Housing Project. We are entirely community funded. We don't take any corporate or government money, so we can avoid the contradiction between ourselves and our like having opposing the state and also being funded by we can avoid the contradiction of opposing the state and also being funded by the state. So if you like what we're doing, you can donate on our GoFundMe. You can donate here through Twitch, I'm pretty sure. You can also just go to the link tree in our Instagram bio, which is at PHPPDX on Instagram. You can sign. The best way to help out is to sign up for our Patreon and pitch in something small every month, so you can continue to get access to all of our content and support us on an ongoing basis. Because this is part of PHP's political economy, is remaining dependent on like the individual working and lower middle class donors who have a fundamentally vested interest in this system transforming dramatically. Because otherwise, how the wealthy people like Elon Musk are certainly never gonna, like, the emperor's never gonna vote for his own dissolution. So here's a fun one. So since we're trying to abolish serfdom, this is random. There's a random number generator that basically gives you different events. So either a thing can pass, or there can be different like events. There can be like it fails to pass. So here's what's up. The landlords, the scholar officials are refusing to give up their serfs without adequate compensation. Their political influence makes this a difficult demand for us to refuse. Quote, "We have relied on serf labor for generations. You cannot simply ask us to release them without compensation. How are we to keep our estate profitable? How are we to maintain the standards of living that we're accustomed to? Our relative poverty would make us the laughingstock of the aristocracy." So you can
the minimum wage.
So you can purchase the serfs, which costs the state bureaucracy and helps the enactment cost. You can put the cost on the serfs, which will lower their standard of living, help us pass it, and also radicalize the fuck out of the serfs because they're having to buy their own fucking freedom, and who can blame them? And you cannot own a human being. So I can basically tank this project, or I can pay these guys more money than they deserve.
What will happen if the serfs get radicalized?
There might be riots. Yeah, imagine paying your workers, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I feel like this is the same as like, what, you want us to just raise the living wage, but we'll be up, our prices will go up.
Right. Well, and what's fascinating about this game too is because there's all these debates on the subreddit about whether this is like a left-wing or a right-wing game. And one of the things it does about modeling slavery that is very historically accurate is it is excellent for the pops that own the buildings that the slaves work on. And it's honestly pretty shitty for everyone else. So their low standard of living means they can't buy as many goods, which means your internal market isn't as profitable. The fact that they are depressing the wages by working for free means that all the wages in the country are depressed, which means the working class is working for cheaper too. The government is picking up the slack for shit like this, and fucking the work, yeah. So it is, and the capitalists are having to compete with these guys who basically get free labor. So it's not good for anybody but the actual pops who own those buildings, and this is a classic example of this. So we're gonna fuck off the landlords because I am not gonna eat the like, we're barely ahead on our bureaucracy as it is, and I'm certainly not gonna make people pay for. So yeah, fuck the landlords, and we'll just deal with it. We have a pretty high legitimacy because we're it's one of the nice things about being an absolute monarchy is when the emperor wants something to happen, it'll just kind of happen even if other people don't like it. And I can just kind of reform the government with whoever, whenever I want. And even if it like hurts the legitimacy, like, because we're a perfectly legitimate government, the time to enact stuff is real short. So yeah, fuck So even though I am of the scholar officials, fuck the rest of them, and they're all pissed off because they oppose the law changes, but they can, what's the word, eat shit. They can historically eat shit. I have 10 million loyalists, and I will probably win a civil war because everyone's peasants, and it's not like even the landlords have better guns than me. Como se dice? Como se dice? Como estes como mierdas? Sí. Puede ser bilingual por un poquito, pero mi español es muy pobre.
So right now you're focusing on just industrialization.
So right now, yeah. So we're just trying to industrialize and build iron. It's going pretty slow. I usually play this on a faster speed, but I don't want people to get overwhelmed. But yeah, basically a lot of this game is building stuff and just kind of being patient. So one thing that we could do is, so from a foreign policy standpoint, so a lot of what we've done is talk about the internal contradictions of China. So at one point, the Chinese Empire used to own all of Southeast Asia through what was called the tributary system. So like right now we own Tibet, and even though they're our vassal, they don't like us, and that's fine. Korea is our vassal in an absolute monarchy, but they like us and they're loyal. And all of these other... So fun fact, this is why my Korean grandma hated Chinese and Japanese people, because Korea was, throughout the last like 150 years, alternatively owned and conquered by the Chinese and Japanese. And she used to tell me things like, they hate us because we invented all the language and culture, and that's why they always conquered us. Even though that's not really true, and most of it came from China, but don't tell my Korean grandma I said that. So if anybody... See? Exactly, Felix. Every Asian American, like East Asian, their culture says that they invented East Asian culture, and the other two are fucking dogs who stole it from them. And the Japanese will say that about the Koreans and the Chinese say that about the Koreans and the Japanese, and I have personally heard the Koreans say that about everyone else. So anybody who tells you that like all the East, it's like it was all harmony before the white man showed up, it's like, nah dog, everybody who had developed a central polity was imperializing everyone else. Like there was at one point an Aztec empire who was empiring over the Tlaxcala and the Tlemcen and the other,
yeah, people have been hyphy for a while.
The non-Mexica fucking ethnic groups I'm not even gonna remember or name because they had their history destroyed by the Azteca and then the Spanish. Like you went to Mexico, you were there. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so there are all these contradictions between the Great Qing and our giant military and pops and needs and...
What is pops?
Populations, like our people, and then like all these like smaller nations that... And this is like why countries trend towards imperialism. You want a Mexico, you know, Aztec history. I mean, honestly, you should, like...
Yeah, you went.
Yeah. You went to Mexico, you know Aztec. I mean, yeah, Zave went to museum... Zave didn't just go to fucking, what is it, Tijuana and like get drunk for a couple, or Cabo and get drunk for a couple weeks with white people. Like he went to museums and shit. Don't at me. Don't at me, Joe Ra.
I'll have you know I'm a sophisticate. I read.
So like so a lot of this game works on markets and selling stuff. So they're not really in our market, they're in their own market, and one thing we could do is start conquering other countries to help our economic growth along. So that is an option.
I feel like that's another thing this game has kind of showed me, and I'm not like agreeing with it, just in terms of like understanding how like internal contradictions of a country's needs create kind of a need for... It doesn't have to go this way, but
it creates an economic incentive for imperialism.
Yeah, like you're saying, I think you didn't have that much iron here. You don't have that much iron in China, right?
So I was playing this game as Prussia. And when you want to get your... Basically, it's like when you want your military to be good enough, you need a certain amount of opium to make Prussia? No shit. Yeah, that's like North Protestant Germany that like founded the German Empire and was the strongest and most militant state in Prussia. Fucking warriors. There's a very famous quote that Prussia was an army with a state attached to it. Yeah, and they went wild and all over Europe, wild and all over France. So yeah, I was playing this other game where basically like, so you need opium in order to run your first aid, because that's like kind of how you did medicine with synthesized opiates, kind of like Percocet today. Kind of like today you synthesize opiates or you take opium and use it in medicine. So as Prussia, I definitely conquered this little state in Persia because it can be home to 47 opium plantations and each one makes 20 at the shittiest, most basic production level. And if you want to have a modern industrialized army where your guys can get healed and you want to have hospitals that work, you need opium. And if you happen to be in North Germany where opium doesn't really grow, you either need to trade for opium or you need to go physically acquire some. And that is a lot of colonization, is European or powers that didn't start with resources deciding to go physically acquire them as cheaply as possible. It's what the United States does today with things like cracking open Iraq so we can get oil at no tariffs. Imperialism is a hell of a drug, and it is a tempting one. Because part of the problem is that Burma's right here. It has like 70 battalions. And part of the contradiction is that there are good arguments to be made, because what happened historically is that China did not conquer Burma, and the East India Company did. So part of the thought, and when Japan did its big empire thing, it was like, hey, we're creating this greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere where none of you are going to be conquered by the Dutch or the British anymore. Because Vietnam got conquered by France, and so did Cambodia, and Burma got, like, that's why this is the Spanish Philippines. So, like, one of the ways to try to keep Asia, especially Southeast Asia, from being colonized by the West is to bring it into the Chinese sphere of influence at gunpoint, whether it wants to or not. So if there are more thumbs up in the chats, then we will invade Burma, and if there are more thumbs down in the chats, then we will not invade Burma. So you decide whether we're conquering Burma to keep it safe from whiteness, and whether they would be happier certainly imperialized by me, or likely imperialized by whiteness. Felix, that's up to you.
The power's
You're
you're
supposed to vote,
now.
Felix. You can send a little thumbs up or like a do it. I'm really not picky.
Haha, history's in your hands now.
History's in your hands.
We have a thumbs up.
Okay, so there's one. One for invade Burma. You can also just, this is just a game. You can just upvote if you want to see how the war works.
It'd be a nice new mechanism.
Felix, that emoji doesn't mean anything. That looks like a nervous person.
I can't even tell what's happening.
It looks like
the weirdest emojis on this chat. The art style is like
maybe Felix has the best emojis. Okay. I want to see war. Okay. Hey, Mag89. Cool. I like that your first vote. Okay.
We got a bloodthirsty one.
Okay, so what we're going to do is try to make them, we're going to vassalize them. So basically they have to give us money. They can't go to war without us. They can't, yeah, so they have to join our wars, and they have to give me 15% of their money every week. So the way that war works in Victoria is you start these like diplomatic plays. So they can just back down. Yeah, so a vassal is basically like a country who's like legally agrees to serve and gives you money. Yes, it's very slippery. It's the slipperiest of all possible positions. So the scholars, okay, so we're still trying to do this surf passing thing. Okay, so every enactment chance, we have a 31% chance to pass it, or a 69% chance to do something else. Fuck you, Zave. So, the landlords in Manchuria brutalized their serfs. She got 30 lashes for dropping the tea. These indignities must end. We will punish them with the full force of the law. Okay, so this is a way where I can both outlaw, so I can just outlaw this, or I can, like, smash them and get fewer people to join their political party, even though it doesn't help me pass it as much. Okay, in spite of my desire to smash these particular landlords, I would rather make long-term structural change. How are we doing on budget's fine. Alright, we should up military pay just a little bit, and then we should mobilize some of our armies and send them to the front. So earlier when I was talking about not getting into shit fights with people who are more technologically advanced than you, that does not apply to Burma, because they are, you can like kind of click on their countries and you can see, and they are using, like they are just as technologically advanced at this point in history as we are. Trying to avoid using like imperial and problematic terms like backwards. So Japan just declared us a rival because they're getting fussy. So why don't we declare a rivalry right back? Fuck you.
Teach them, Jorah. I declare a rivalry.
And then we get more influence, which means that we can like try to sway or help other people. Great mountain dogs. Oh, Burmese, yeah, they are. Burmese mountain dogs are great. Burma has declared us to be a rival. Well, fine, rivalry right back.
What does that do? What does that mean? And is that like a? What does that represent like in real life?
So it pisses off the other country. It also gives you influence. And what it represents is in real life, it's basically like your diplomats talking shit about their country. And because you are fighting other people, it creates more because it pisses off somebody, it creates more opportunities for you to try to make friends among other places.
Like us in Russia right now?
Yeah, where it's like, we declare Russia to be our rival, so all of the people who are worried about Russia are like, hey, can I have $60 billion for Ukraine, please?
You unite the haters.
Yeah, you unite the haters, basically. Exactly.
Okay. And does this affect within the country, too? It's like, hey, everybody, we fucking hate Burma. Don't really pay attention to maybe the other things going on in our country.
It doesn't really affect the internal politics, and that is one of the things I wish war did more. It does affect...
I also wish war affected the internal politics more.
That's one of the things I wish. How many more battalions should I mobilize? I guess. Fine, whatever. Okay, so we're building tool factories. We're still short on fucking iron.
So you're just sending military...
Yeah, so the way the war works is, so basically like, so there's this diplomatic play. So during the escalation phase, you can kind of like add different war goals. It costs like money and influence to do that. Everybody who's got an interest in the region can join the war. So I could convince Great Britain to join because there's, but they would want, what do they want? So if I let them puppet Burma, they'll help me. So this is why Great Britain wants to join the war. Is if I will do this whole thing to give them Burma, and that's no, exactly. So during this diplomatic phase, either country can back down. So like if a bunch of Western powers join them, you voted thumbs up! Fuck you, Felix! You don't get to vote for me to colonize, then be like, bad Brian, don't.
Didn't Felix just put some weird emojis
Oh, and I can
in the
make
chat?
them pay me war reparations. I can force them to ban. How are we doing on points? I can't sway anybody. Well, yeah, obviously not. I can't, well, because the only way, the reason I don't want to use the English is the only reason they'll join me is if I give them Burma. Because they would, like, accept, so you can, so when you click here, they're like, hey, you could sway me, and it's like, okay, how? And they're like, sometimes it's like you can just give them little diplomacy things, but they're only going to do it if I give them Burma, and fuck that.
Is there a time where you would do that?
Give them Burma.
Not in this exact moment.
Like, if I was constantly being chopped up by Western powers and I wanted an enemy of somebody trying to chop me, if I knew Burma was going to get got and I wanted somebody who I liked who didn't like my European enemy to get it, I might do that to help them. Because there's also a bunch of these like little independent kingdom, because these all used to be little, before this was Malaysia or Singapore or whatever it is now, like these all used to be independent little kingdoms of Malay people. So there was like a Sultanate of Perak, a Sultanate of Johore, a Sultanate of Selangor, right? And at this point, none of these like little principalities, oh, maybe this is Singapore right here. Yeah, so there's Singapore, because it used to be a British colony. So like, so that's why Britain has that, is so they can like fuel, that's why they used to have that, is so they can fuel ships there. But it's like, anyway, so like all of this is Indonesia now. It used to be owned by the Dutch and like different regional powers that were mostly like feudal monarchies running their tiny little part of, I think that's Brunei, and then this one's Java or Aceh, I forget. I'm not good at islands. Don't quote me on any of that. I'm not an expert in Indonesia. So yeah, but we have like 300 battalions and the same level of technology. So we should be able to, if it goes to war with Burma, we should be able to win pretty handily. Okay, so Burma backs down in the diplomatic play, because rather than go to war and lose a bunch of guys, they just give me what I want. So they don't like it and they hate us, but they are our vassal. And now they are paying us 2.8K a month, and they can't. And in order to try to conquer Burma, now the East India Company has to declare war against us. And even though they might be able to, even though I don't think we could beat them in an offensive war, I do believe that we could hold them off for a while, just because offense is hard, and we have literally 1 million soldiers if we feel like it. So yeah, they are not, yeah, so we're fine. Great Britain.
Did Mao give any comments on imperialism and contradiction?
Yes, he did. So he talks about how like when the West is invading, that, so like a lot of times so he talks about how like in China specifically, like there's a point, Jorah says Mao loves it, no notes, yeah. So he talks about how like that's part of what unites the revolution, is like this desire to drive imperialism out. And when imperialism is the primary contradiction, you see Chinese people like banding together to fight it off. But it's also part of the thing is that like imperialism wouldn't be able to exploit or colonize China if China didn't already have these internal contradictions that like make it so that it's not as technologically advanced as the West. And like the West wouldn't be imperializing if it didn't have all these contradictions that created the conditions for its political and economic development to be here imperializing.
Does he know what the contradictions are of the Western powers that?
So I mean, a lot of it is just like, so the primary contradiction under capitalist society for any communist is the contradiction between the capitalists and the working class, or like the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, right? And like within every country there is the class that owns the means of production and power, and then there is the class of people that sells their labor to them. And though there are other groups of people, like that is always the primary contradiction.
Okay. Thing's really taking it out of you.
The serfdom thing is obnoxious. So like this is just kind of how the political dice go sometimes, because sometimes the Republicans in the Senate are cool, and most of the time they're dickbags. So cut through the red tape and eat a bureaucracy penalty. Fine, whatever. Take less of a penalty to enactment time, whatever.
So then what were like Mao's focuses when he came into power? What were like the contradictions that he was focusing, and how did he start to address those?
Okay, so what Mao tried to do when they won the revolution was jumpstart the means of production, because unlike the historical unlike the way I'm playing it, the historical Qing dynasty did not do this and was very resistant to the development of like free capital and free power, right? And like the free movement of money. Actually, speaking of free capital, so we're going to use some of our authority to try to bolster the capitalists and the intellectuals. Well, at this point in history, they're the ones who really want to kick the fucking landlords out of power, and the proletariat is like 0.3% of the population. So realistically, it's like we don't, just from a population standpoint, like, you know, we have laborers, but it's like we don't really have too many clerks or even like or bureaucrats. Like, it's still mostly peasants, and they are under the landlords who have the vast majority of the political strength.
And was this still pretty true when Mao came into power, right? It was still mostly like...
So it was less true. So it was less true in the... It was still very true in this part of China. Like inland, central, western China is still very rural to this day. And just like the United States, like the coast... Because like nowadays, like this part of Manchuria is less developed than this part. But like these little coastal states are way better developed than these ones. And even though these ones are still very populated with like 4 million people, I don't know if they can see that. Even though these ones are still populated with like 4 million people, like they're still very, just like the way Kansas and Nebraska are very rural. Cool. Good night, Felix. Yeah, we're gonna hang out for like 20 or 30 more minutes. I don't know, I'm having fun. Are you having fun, Zave?
I'm always having fun when I'm here, learning and being with friends.
Thanks, Felix. We love you.
Thank you, Felix.
You see who's in the chat? Damn, there are like fucking 10 people here. This is crazy.
Yeah, what up?
Very cool. What's up, homies? Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. If y'all have questions, like, feel free to throw them in the chat. The goal for this is, you know, doing political education, just trying to take a lot of things that are hard to understand, like economics in general, like politics, political theory, history, and putting it... That's why I like this game, is like it gamifies economies, it gamifies politics, it gamifies history, which I think makes it a lot easier to understand.
Yeah, it really does. You know what I mean? Because it's like, I think part of the reason why I feel like I know anything about like war and politics is because of strategy games. Like going back to playing Age of Empires with your friends, and it was like you could like declare alliances against each other or not, because you didn't have to play with fixed teams in Age 2. So a lot of it was like convincing your friends to help you take down. So it's like the real politic of managing a political economy is like just kind of a thing you can do for fun, and it's much lower stakes. And like if you're really trying to be a communist who's like planning the future, like you kind of like, if we really want to take over from the rich, we have to like know how to run an economy. If we want to take over from the senators, it's like we have to know how to run a government. If we want to take over from the courts and the pigs, we have to like know how to run an abolitionist justice system. And we don't have to like know all those things before we take over, but we have like, the first step is like accepting that we have to master those things and like get at least to where capitalist science is right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and not just their like practical science, but their social science.
Exactly. It's like knowing what are the contradictions. A big thing for Marxism is like material reality, the real, like where actually are we? What's happening right now? How do the systems work? Because if you don't really understand like where you are right now and the history that has led to this moment, you're not really going to know how to transition from it to where you need to go.
Okay.
You know, like, I was going to say, like, you can't just, you know, like you're saying, we can't just, as much as the legal system does need to be abolished, like, we can't just abolish everything all at once. We need to know how it works so we can start to focus, like, all right, what are the main contradictions of the time? You know, that's part of why the organization for People's Housing Project, like, we picked it, was like housing. You know, when we were talking about what should we do, it was like, okay, the main contradictions we kind of see are like police, because it was 2020, 2021. It was like police, medical system, housing. are some of the big things that are really impacting people. Monsters sleep. What's everyone's favorite country?
Soviet Union.
And so
at this point, Cuba.
Yeah, so that's like why we picked doing, setting up emergency shelters for folks, because it's like, okay, well, the big contradiction is like housing is fucking skyrocketing out of control because the contradictions of privatized housing lead to increasing rents. They lead to terrible protections for renters. They lead to the commodification of a basic human right, that we get sold this idea that that's like just how things are and you should accept it. And so by building shelters for folks, especially on public land, it's like, okay, no, we resist this definition that like property is private, that even public land cannot be used for the service of the public, and that like housing should be under the guise of like an unregulated, uncontrolled, unelected system of capitalists. It's like, look how bad it is for the serfs who are fucking owned where they work and where they live. It's the same thing now. It's like we having our fucking housing and safety controlled by private entities for profit is like leads to the situation we're in now. This isn't a fluke of capitalism. This is how this functions.
Yeah, and it's like even when your landlord is cool, like it is still a fundamental like power imbalance and problem. So, and and I want to go back to what you said a minute ago about like, you have to know where we've come from, because it's like, for those of you who missed it, because I clicked the button like a jackass, we just passed serfdom abolished finally. So the peasants are finally free to move between states, and the landlords are, if you go back to our government, the landlords are pissed. Classic. And everybody else is pretty stoked, because like these guys went from +2 to +5, and they're happy now because they endorsed the recent change from serfdom to serfdom abolished. Though that's the peasants, that's literally everybody who's not the landlords. Endorse recent change, even the people who don't have any power. The only people who don't are the petty bourgeoisie, and that's where you don't trust them ever. So you can see how like that's like how this gamifies like the different interest groups and what they think about the changes in law, right? So one of the things that I think is really that this game doesn't model very well, because it's not supposed to, is like the psychological impact of being because it's like 1838, right? So if you were born in 1800, you spent almost 40 years of your life, right? Or like imagine like you spent the first 26 years of your life
just as a serf.
Yeah, where it's like you're born in 1812 and your whole life, like everybody you've ever known has been owned by your landlord. And then some bureaucrat from the emperor comes out and says, by decree of the emperor, like, you're no longer serfs, you're a free peasant, like, you own this land.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something we've seen before, where, like, especially in the U.S., I can imagine points where, like, okay, cool, like, all right, slavery's abolished, but then there's, like, no actual protections for, like, freed people, so then you just get sharecropping.
Well, yeah, and then they stopped suppressing, after the Civil War, they stopped suppressing the fucking Confederates, and they should have kept the fucking boot heel on that neck for another fucking 100 years, it seems like, given the way Brown versus Board of Education went.
You're absolutely right, George. Psychology did not exist until, is that 1881?
1881, yeah, no, Sigmund Freud, when he said, do a bunch of coke and realize that there's a bunch of stuff making you act that way that you're not even aware of. Which, you know, to be fair, is like a huge shift. Why is our money going so? Because we're spending so much money on construction goods.
Oh, so Mao, what were some of the first things that he was focusing on as the contradictions when he came into power?
What Mao was focusing on... What Mao was focusing on when he came to power was basically like... So China was kind of like still a mostly peasant economy when Mao took over. And his whole goal was like, how do we advance the means of production? So he allied up with the Soviet Union and started importing a bunch of Soviet technology, military and production. So that's why like China was able to industrialize so quickly, because rather than have to like invent or purchase steel factory blueprints from the West, they were just given them by the Soviet Union, who also gave them a bunch of money, and like, you know, in exchange for preferential trading deals with China, because look at all these resources and all these people that haven't been integrated into the world market yet. So Mao was trying to consolidate power against the landlords and the capitalists. He was trying to fight off imperialists, and he was trying to like develop the means of production. So the big first program that he did that did not go very well was called the Great Leap Forward. And the idea was that like the peasants were supposed to just kind of like transform the economy into an industrial economy overnight. And he was like, quit farming and go make steel. But they didn't build like modern steel foundries out in rural China. So what a lot of the peasants were making like turned out to be pig iron. So it's like shitty, they take the shitty low iron, quality iron they have, they burn it, and now it's like not good for steel. Because they're trying to make steel, but they don't have the stuff to make it, so now it's not good. And because he got a bunch of farmers to do that, now there's a famine. And now there's no steel, and now there's no steel to trade for food. So...
Because there's no steel, because they didn't have a way to make steel, and there's no food.
Yeah, so that was one of the big problems of early China, and like, you know, China hasn't had a famine since then because they like figured out industrial production because it takes time. Play BioShock and talk about Ayn Rand. Okay.
Oh my god. Yeah, Jor and I played, I got so into libertarianism.
Why?
Not like I was into it, I was just like fascinated with it in BioShock. Love hearing men talk about Ayn Rand.
Oh,
yeah,
God.
I'm sorry, Joe. I made you watch so many videos of white people.
I fucking hate Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand's okay, so I will tell you, I read most of Atlas Shrugged. I, like everyone else, got bored and gave up during that long speech by her self-insert character. And, like, the two parts of Atlas Shrugged that I thought were genuinely good...
Yeah, it's true. There's a pipeline. There's a
BioShock to libertarianism pipeline.
Oh, it's deep, yeah.
Okay,
I mean, that's the point of it, but it becomes unironic.
Yeah, the two parts of Ayn Rand that I thought were good is at one point in Atlas Shrugged, one of the characters talks about cigarettes as like a metaphor for human mastery over technology. And how, like, you know, every time they smoke a cigarette, they look at the fire at the end of the cig, and they think about how, for cavemen thousands of years ago, like, the ability to master fire was this, like, brand new, beautiful thing that, like, indirectly led to the development of civilization as we know it. And now it's like, we've got it mastered to the point that it's, like, been reduced to a single dot on the end of our useless luxuries that we use to power through smokes. And then, I just like, as a former cigarette smoker, I just thought that was a really good metaphor. I just think that's like, as a writer, I think it's in 1,000 pages, that's one of her good metaphors. And then the other time in 1,000 pages that she does something impressive is when they're talking about John Galt climbing a mountain. And this like drunk leans over, and it's like, because it's like a metaphor for the libertarian concept of individualist exceptionalism. And she's like, I know who John Galt was. He was the greatest explorer to ever live, and he was looking for the fountain of youth. And he found it on top of the world's highest mountain. And she goes into this fucking description of like, you know, like the blood under his nails and how hard it is to breathe up there and how fucked up he gets, like scrabbling down the dirt of the mountain as he climbs, but he finally gets to the top of the fountain, or top of the mountain where he finds the fountain of youth, and he wanted to bring it down for everybody. And the main character goes, well, why didn't he? And the lady goes, because he found that it couldn't be brought down. And that is like such a beautiful, if you really, like, if you believe in that stupid bullshit, that's a really excellent metaphor for the libertarian ideal of the human, because it's like, yeah, there is promise and power, but only if you're good enough, and it cannot be fundamentally shared with everybody. It's like the fucking Holy Grail at the end of fucking Indiana Jones, where you can drink from it and have eternal life if you're worthy and can pass the challenges, but if you try to take the Grail out of the space where the challenges are, it sinks the whole Grail. And it's like, if that scene was what, like, in the Atlas Shrugged thing, where it's like, oh yeah, he found the Grail and he passed the trials and he was worthy of God's eternal life and he wanted to bring the Grail back for everyone. And it's like, well, what happened? It's like he found the Grail could not be brought back, right? I mean, yes. Yes, that is a fact.
Yes, you're right. If you're into that stupid bullshit, that was a very beautiful metaphor.
The Da Vinci Code is a documentary, and the events within it happen in real time. All right, so we're gonna start investing in society, and then really we need to be investing in our farming tech because we need more. How are we doing? Do we still have an iron goods shortage? Why? Why is there no? Why does God hate me and not want me to have iron?
I guess I'll see if this question makes sense as I continue to say it. But I guess what are some of the major contradictions you're seeing right now
in what?
American society?
So, like, you know, there remains the classical socialist ones of, like, somehow Jeff Bezos owns Amazon and is worth billions of dollars even though he does fuck all. Somehow Elon Musk owns Twitter and Tesla even though he does fuck all. So there's, like, still the contradiction between, like, the management holding class and the working class. But, like, one of the big political contradictions you can see developing is, like, a social contradiction over abortion and women's rights, where you can tell that, like, the patriarchal Puritan culture of America that's, like, also woven in with settler colonialism and white supremacy is like, hey, let's oppress women. And just like during the slavery contradiction in America, like, Texas passed its version of the Fugitive Abortion Act, where they're like, hey, if you even help somebody go to a state where this is legal, you can get in trouble. Just like, hey, if you help a state, or if you help a slave get to a state where it's legal to be free, the fact that you helped him means now you're a fucking criminal too.
Right.
And so, like, when you look at the tax code, when you look at the culture, when you look at, like, the way that the fucking state functions politically, culturally, and economically, like, at one point this was two countries, and in many ways culturally and politically it is again. Yep. And whatever unity was built after the Civil War resolved is getting to
the contradictions
are getting heightened in America. So I think that's one, is the red state, blue state one. I think there's also, like, I think just because of, like, the rapid pace of technology, I do think, like, the contradictions between each generation are sharper. To the point that, like to the point that you're, like, 7 years younger than me, and even you're like, I don't really know how TikTok works. And you're only 5 years older than the people who kind of know how TikTok works. And even Cameron and Jorah, who are, like, 22 and 24, are like, I think we're too old for TikTok. And it's like, the gap between my parent, like, the gap between a guy born in 1838 in China and a guy born in 1898 in China, in rural feudal China, are not that big. He has basically the same fucking life that his great-granddad did. Like, whereas, like, if you were born in 1938 versus, like, 1998, like, by the time you're 20 years old in 58 and 2018, like, the world doesn't even kind of really look the same. I'm not too old, I'm pretentious, and I don't know how to have... That's true. Okay. So, either way, for whatever reason, I feel like pretentiousness is a thing you cultivate with age, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a thing you cultivate with a lib arts degree, and that's fine. I have one too.
But that is true. I was talking to someone about that at a bar. He was like, yeah, I mean, just look at, like, you know, kind of 1800 to 1900, and then 1900 to 2000. It's like 1900 started with, like, no cars, and then we ended with, like, internet and space travel and fucking
nuclear bombs.
Yeah.
The internet, streaming, like, we started with literally the phone, like, the first phonographs, and then ended with the iPod.
Yeah. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And you have 100 years too, like, we have the global economy. So we've got, like, these fascinating contradictions too, where, like, we still have a lot of conflict between areas. At the same time, like, our economic system is increasingly more interconnected.
Well, and part of the lie of liberalism, and part of the reason I wanted to do this book, is that, like, that whole idea of the Soviet Union falling and us being at the end of history, like, part of the liberal fantasy, and, like, Mao talks about this in the very beginning. He says there are basically, like, and he's quoting from Lenin, but he goes, there's basically, like, two fundamental world outlooks, right? Like, there's two ways of, like, looking at the world. There's the dialectical materialist way, and then there's like the materialist way of looking at the real world, and then there's, like, this philosophically idealist way. And he's like, and the way that they go about knowing things is different too, because a dialectician tries to study the internal contradictions of a thing and the contradictions between it and the things around it. And, like, an empiricist or, like, a capitalist scientist, just, like, because capitalist science is all about, like, reducing the variables, right? It's like, you got to have the repeatable experiments, and you got to look at the thing in isolation, otherwise the science isn't fucking valid, right?
Right.
And what a dialect, and, like, I believe that you can learn things about stuff in isolation, but what a dialectician will tell you is that, like, studying the thing on its own only gets you so far, and you really have to, like, study the thing in motion and in contradiction with other things. Right. You know what I mean?
That's the thing, like the laboratory effect.
Yeah.
It's like things can't be fully replicated because they can only exist in the isolation of the lab.
Yeah, that's 100% what it is. Okay, dye works accident. Oh, workers die. Yeah, so as part of modeling industrialism, workplaces were not always safe, and every workplace regulation is, like, built off the blood of the workers who died there. So several workers died at the Shandong Dye Works when an industrialized tub spilled out onto them. Locals are upset, claiming that locals' poor safety regulations are to blame for the accident. Workshop employees were left dying. We shall all die sooner or later.
Oh, God,
they shall not have died in vain.
Oh my God, the puns are so brutal.
The puns are obnoxious. So they shall not have died in vain. So, like, either way, people are getting shit, and at least this way we can start to boost the trade unions as well.
Where do you see that? Where does it say that?
So right here, so the top one, you get 4% mortality in manufacturing in Shandong, and 5% of them become more radical. Or you can deal with the mortality and give support to the trade unions, which will help destabilize the country in the long run, but also empower the trade unions, which, if you're really trying to build towards full communism, you always want the trade unions to be empowered, especially at this historical stage.
And then in this game, though, in real life, if you start to destabilize and let these movements pop up, like, you kind of go away. But in this one, it just stays you, right? Like, you will just
you become
from the monarch to whatever.
To the person running the council republic. Like, basically, it's like your government's run by a council republic, and you can you have to deal with the elections and all the bullshit that comes with. So yeah, we are just trying to stack up iron and resolve this shortage in our market.
Is that pretty reflective in real life? A lot of countries got very focused in iron production.
Well, yeah, because you need iron and iron's like a key component of an industrializing nation. Because, like, just like at this time, it's like, you go from literally handmade tools. So I think now, we can build gold mines there, which we need to jump in the front of the production queue, because those are money as fuck.
So here you also have a little bit of a planned economy.
Yeah, so because it's like, and there in Victoria too, there were ways in which, and like lots of the economy still manages on its own. So without getting too deep into the woods, like literally every building or set of buildings has an amount of productivity. They have an amount of cash reserves and wages that they pay out. They have employment, and like you can see here in this tooling workshop, it's like not fully employed because there's a shortage of iron, which is why we're building iron mines, except we just had the opportunity to build gold mines, so we jumped those ahead of the iron mines, because that's what a responsible industrializer would do.
Why the gold?
Because that's what's going to bring in, they're the most...
raw wealth.
Yeah, they're just like literally...
Oh, because we're still in the gold standard.
Yeah, because we're literally just mining gold.
Currency.
Yeah, we're literally just mining gold, and like it's just raw wealth.
Gotcha.
Minus whatever we pay the peasants or whoever's working on the gold mines. I think it's who works in gold mines. Oh, they're not built yet, so you can't see. That's annoying.
Sweet. Has anybody got questions? Whether tied to something we've said or... Brian's just a fucking smart-ass dude. So if you got, like, history, political, economic questions you've been wondering about, like Felix was just asking, like, oh, like, what's kind of the difference between, like, a capitalist and a laborer? And what about, like, management versus labor earlier?
Alright, while we're trying to figure that out, let's do some trading and try to make more money and improve the economy. So we some fabric to Britain and Russia.
So they can also do, again, a plug. I don't know if everyone in here still knows PHP, but he said grassroots group, we're getting grassroots workers democracy, getting emergency shelters and support services to houseless folks. And I'd recommend giving a like and a subscribe here. Does that how it works? We like and subscribe. This is our first stream, so kind of learning.
So
what
yeah,
the lingo
so
is.
you can absolutely just sign up. So yeah, so you can absolutely. I think you can subscribe to our Twitch stream. I think you can subscribe. I think you can subscribe to our stream directly through Twitch, which is cool.
Yeah, we're also always open to suggestions if you have like a concept you want covered. I think we're gonna do Victoria 3 for a while. The next one was gonna be looking at Marx's Capital Volume 1.
Yeah, and how commodities move and function. And yeah, basically like how commodities move and function, because that's like really what Capital Volume 1 is about. I've never read the whole thing. It'll probably be worth talking about multiple times. And really, we did not get through that much game time. We got through like 2 years. So we had enough time to like... Jesus, that was an hour and a half? Yeah, this game goes fast, especially when we're talking about communism the whole time.
Start wrapping up then. Cool. Well, yeah, I think it's been an hour and a half. So yeah, well, I'd give, like I said, I'd recommend subscribing. We're also on Instagram. It is the same. It's just PHP PDX. It's the same as our handle. And yeah, we've got a Patreon as well. Because like I said, like we've said, we're entirely grassroots. So at this point, we've had like over 3,000 people make like
3,000 individual donors. We have
Yeah.
more than 100 monthly donors. So there are lots of ways to get involved. And honestly, the best and easiest way is just pitching in something small once a month.
Yeah, just letting people know about the stream too. Like we, are doing this type of political education because we feel it's really important for people to be able to be politically and economically knowledgeable. That's like one of the biggest tools we have is the more we can understand the systems, and the more we can understand how to think, the more we can really push back. And that's why I really liked Mao's Contradiction, because it is like a tool for how to think. It's been the same. Why I liked, not that I am a Buddhist, but why I like Buddhism, it's a lot about like, here's some frameworks and tools of thinking, like mindfulness, like holding your thoughts, being aware, etc. So it is important to learn historical facts. It's also important to learn ways of thinking. So I hope that has been something we've been able to like convey today is, thinking contradictions. And I was telling Brian beforehand, like I've used it, even just thinking in like literature, like what are the contradictions that this book is about, like loss and losing a loved one and finding a different way to love. That was a bad example, but like, what was a better example?
Well, endings and beginnings, right? It's like it's like there is no, like everything that begins has an ending. And it's like, especially when it comes to... So love is full of contradictions, right? Because there's the contradiction between the two people in the relationship, which like... Because that's like part of any relationship, whether it's like platonic or whatever, that is between two people, is like a relationship is a contradiction between those two people, right? Where it's like they're individuals, but they come together to form this group, right? So like how can support more declared interests. Let's go declare some interest. Let's go declare an interest in Europe so we can sell them stuff. It's a contradiction between two people, and like it, sometimes it resolves in one of them dying, and most of the time it resolves in them divorcing or breaking up, right? Because over time, like you know, you get together and there's this honeymoon phase of like the unity of opposites. And like the longer time goes on, the more contradictions sharpen, because two people have two separate reactions to things.
Right.
And two separate people have two separate traumas and histories and ways of looking at the world and beliefs and love languages and attachment styles, right?
Right.
And all of these like little contradictions within them, like, you know, it's just like, you know, your partner can't bring out anything in you that's just not like an unresolved trauma, right? And it's like, fair. And that's another way of saying the internal contradictions within you become operative through an external cause, but they only really activate your internal contradictions.
Right.
Like, it's not the fact that she does this, it's the fact that you're insecure. It's not the fact that you're standoffish, it's the fact that she's anxious. You know what I mean? Or whatever. Like, or whatever,
Heightening
right?
and pressing on those contradictions.
Yeah, and it always is, and especially in like romantic relationships, like they're full of them. You know what I mean? Especially under capitalism, it's like one of you makes more money than the other. Did we finally resolve our iron shortage? No.
So close though.
No, we're not even. I don't even think that's fucking true. We're not close. We're not
Which I'm
close.
supportive.
Each mine builds this many. Our construction center is using too much iron. We should probably try to import iron from someone. 45. Even if I import all this iron, it's still not gonna help. Fine, whatever.
Yeah,
I
well, I'd like
need
to say
bureaucracy.
contradiction is very important. This has been Victoria 3, and
Okay,
now
I should
on
save this.
contradiction.
I should save this. Okay.
And yeah, so I don't know exactly the next time that we'll do this, but it would be great to do it. It's probably going to be in January. But yeah, if you follow on Instagram, we'll get another post up there. It's on our meetup as well. And yeah, well, thanks everyone for rolling through. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's very beautiful to see all of you, and yeah, farewell.